Alright, so I just finished Fatal Frame 4, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, and I wanted to go over my thoughts on it in a video, just sort of rant about it, give you my review about all the different things in the game that I like and didn't like. I want to start first. We're gonna, right away out the gate, what blew me away about this game, as soon as I booted it up and started playing it for the first time, was the graphics and the sound in this game. For those of you who don't know, Fatal Frame 4 never released outside of Japan. It was a Wii-only game in Japan, and it never released anywhere else. There was some fan translations you could play, but that's about it. I thought going into this that this was just a re-release, like an upscaled re-release, finally for English audiences of the game. But that is not the case. This is a full remaster. A lot of the graphics are improved, redone. The game looks absolutely beautiful on PC, in my opinion. Now, it's not a AAA title. It's not like super high budget. It's not gonna absolutely. Is it competing with, you know, like a Black Myth Wukong and other modern games that are coming out? No, not at all. But for what it is, I thought the game looked absolutely very beautiful. The models looked great. The environments, especially. Wow, the environments in this game blew me away. Some of the best and most memorable looking environments I've seen in recent years. Very atmospheric. They really play into this game's horror aesthetic. And even on top of all that, the sound design, absolutely incredible. This is a game you want to play with headphones. Please do not deprive yourself. Play this game with headphones. They're genuinely creepy and dreadful noises. Things creaking in other rooms. It's absolutely stunning. There's this one room I remember where it was making that grudge noise of the just droning with no other music while you're in the room, and it was almost unbearable to have headphones on during that whole section. Fantastic in terms of sound and visual design. I think the lighting I felt like was very good. There's some really nice looking shadows in this game as well. I'm not sure how this game holds up visually on other platforms. I did play this on PC, to be fair. I was running it at over 100 FPS at 1080p on PC, but it looked great on my end. I'm not sure how it works on consoles, but it looked absolutely fantastic. Lighting was great, sound was great, environments were great. The only thing that I would have to say about the graphics and presentation here that I found a little lackluster was some of the textures were still pretty low res. When you get up close, especially some of the wood textures in the game, they become very pixelated. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. I noticed quite a few times when I played through, I'm like, oh, that texture looks it's a very clear texture. The resolution on it was really nice, but wow, it was super pixelated. I think that could have been touched up a little bit before release. But overall, graphics and sound I thought were absolutely fantastic. Masterclass, in my opinion. I think the game looks great. And just to top it all off, I think the Japanese horror aesthetic that we get in this game is just very rare in gaming. We have a lot of Japanese horror series, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, tons of them out there, but I don't think a lot of them focus on actual, like, true Japanese horror aesthetics. Stuff like movies like the original Ring and the original Grudge did. I think this game really captures that and provides a nice change of pace from these other horror games. The Fatal Frame series has always stood out from other horror games in the gaming space, just because of its pure focus on Japanese horror. And I think that's one of the game's strongest suits, and it makes for a more unique horror experience as opposed to what you would get elsewhere. When it comes to the gameplay here, we do have a lot to talk about. Now, if you're not familiar with the Fatal Frame series, this is the first game in the series that shifts to a third-person perspective, over the shoulder, kind of like Resident Evil 4 style. The other games in the series, up until 1, 2, and 3, up until now, they all featured a fixed camera angle system like Resident Evil, Silent Hill did. And while this change, I feel like, is very refreshing to the series, it's nice to have a different perspective on things, I do think that this is also the source of a lot of the game's biggest downfalls. Changing to this over-the-shoulder perspective really affects a lot more than you would think. In previous games in the series, you would have sections where you're still in control of your character, and the framing of the shot that you're moving around in, like somewhere in the background a ghost would walk by while you're walking around in the foreground, while you're still fully in control, and it would make it feel more tense and scary, as it felt like ghosts and monsters and stuff could just appear out of nowhere while you're still in control of the game and walking around. And you were always, in every shot that you were going by, your eyes were scanning the environment for something moving, something creepy just lurking around in the environment. And I think a lot of that has been taken away here because of the shift to a third-person, more traditional perspective where you're more in control of the camera than ever before. You're never guaranteed to be looking in any certain direction. So in order to correct for that, the developers had to take control away from the player more often. And when they're trying to show a ghost or a scare, or like a ghost that's walking around the background or looking through a window in the background, they can't just make it happen and while you're walking around, because you might not even be looking there. So they just end up pausing the game basically in a little mini cutscene, showing you the ghost, showing you where it is, and then giving control back to you after a few seconds. And this is a theme for a lot of the game. Like, most ghosts in the game will appear this way. Even ghosts that are your enemies will appear this way, taking a lot of the tension and scariness around all the ghostly encounters you'll be having in the game. I think it really devalues the scare factor. So they needed some other system, because taking away control from the player pretty much every 5 minutes to show them something really starts getting a little bit grating on you and devalues the scare factor of the game. Like, it's not that scary when you're getting shown something in a cutscene versus gameplay. But yeah, I think that's the most controversial change to this game's gameplay section, and it does extend to the combat as well. Combat was heavily impacted by this change. While the combat is still your normal Fatal Frame fare, and if you're not familiar with Fatal Frame combat, essentially you usually play the games in a third-person or fixed camera perspective. And when you try to attack a ghost, the ghost will come at you, and you have a camera that exorcises ghosts. So what happens is you shift into a first-person perspective in order to take pictures of the ghosts around you in order to exorcise them. And normally in like the previous games, 1 to 3, you can sort of stay in the fixed camera perspective to see where the ghosts are in the room, then shift to the first person perspective and make micro adjustments based on this sort of hot and cold light system they have. They have this light that lights up brighter when you're looking more in the direction of a ghost, and then dims when you're looking away from them. So you pull up the camera, make little micro adjustments, find the ghost, search for them, and then take a picture. With this system of camera, even when you're not in the camera mode, when you're not in first person mode, it's still hard to tell where the ghosts are, because you're over the shoulder perspective. You only really have a 180 degree vision, if that, when in previous games you had vision of the entire room. So because of this change, instead of having the sort of hot-cold light system that I was describing the previous games had to locate ghosts, they changed it to where it also includes what direction the ghost is outright. So if a ghost is behind you, there'll be a little like down arrow, and the thing will light up red telling you, hey, the ghost is behind you, which honestly is more detrimental to the game's combat than anything, because it kind of removes that tension of desperately searching around for the ghost and trying to find it before it finds you. It takes a lot of the scares out of the combat. That's not to say the combat is bad. The combat is as good as it ever has been in Fatal Frame, if not better. But I think this one change has really undermined a lot of the tension of the series, making this game far less scary than its predecessors. Having to desperately swing around the camera with a narrow scope of vision just enhanced the combat. Swinging around the camera and all of a sudden seeing a ghost in your cameras right up in the camera lens is something that just it doesn't work in this game as well, because I know he's behind me. I know he's there. There's a couple moments you'll have, especially with some more fast-moving ghosts that just go right up into the camera super quickly. But it's not as radical of a scare as it was in previous games. Instead, what they have done with this sort of hot and cold light system is repurpose it into a item finding system, if that makes any sense. So in the bottom right of your screen, there'll be a blue light that will start shining if an item is nearby or when you're looking in the direction of an item. So you play hot and cold with items while you're searching the room, but you still have to like shine your flashlight over these items to actually see them. So the blue gauge will tell you if there's an item there, and then you have to sort of look around and search for the item based on if you think you're close to it or not, which would be a fairly fine system, especially for exploring. I don't mind anything that makes me explore these environments more, because the environments are genuinely fun to explore, like I mentioned before. They're very beautiful, very well detailed. A system that makes you explore them a little more is definitely welcome. However, having to shine your flashlight on the item itself is a problem, not because of that act, but because the right stick isn't really truly mapped to the flashlight. Like, you would think that moving the right stick would move the direction you're pointing the flashlight and thusly the camera as well. But that's really not the case. It's very loosely tied to your flashlight. The camera is very loosely tied to your flashlight and your character. It's very strange. Like, you don't really have much control. You have a little influence of where the flashlight goes, but not full control. And this was pretty frustrating for me early on, trying to get the light to shine where I knew the item was, but I just couldn't get it there, and my character was just spinning around in circles, like desperately just pointing the flashlight everywhere except for the one place I needed it to go. However, I did realize at one point that putting the camera into first person and looking at where the item is will also make the item show up. So I think that it's kind of an issue, but it's really not that bad of an issue. Once you know that you can just go into first person to look, it's not that big of a deal, because that's really the only thing you need to have fine camera control over in the game while exploring. So I wouldn't count it as a big deal, but it definitely can be annoying early on, especially if you don't know that little trick to go into first person. Because they don't explain that to you. They just say, oh, hey, shine your flashlight to find the items. And you just sort of assume that you have to do that in third person, but no, you can do that with the camera up and everything. It's no big deal. Speaking of the items, some of the items that you can find are these little stones or upgrades and points, a bunch of little upgrade items that you can put on your camera, including lenses, which give you special powers during combat, like a stronger shot or slowing down ghosts. And you can also find these little stones, which are basically upgrade points that allow you to make your camera more powerful. You can increase the power your camera does. You can make the charge on the camera charge faster, because when you point the camera at a ghost, it takes a while to charge up to do more damage. So you can increase the rate at which that charges up. You can increase the damage, how many points that you receive for taking a picture at a ghost, which can be used to buy items later. And they dole out these stones slowly over the course of the story. I do find that they seem to be a little stingier with them early on, but then in the late game, they just sort of throw them at you to the point where, like, my camera was, like, barely upgraded up until, like, the final chapter, and then all of a sudden I got it to max upgrade, like, really quickly. I was like, oh, okay, thanks, I guess, but, like, I feel like these could have been doled out in a little more spread out, a little more consistent increments over the course of the story. But it does make exploration, again, worthwhile, and I appreciate that, because I was desperately trying to find any little upgrade that I could find for my camera once I knew that items had upgrade points in them. I really wanted to get my camera more powerful, especially in the early parts of the game where you are limited in the power that you're able to deal out to these ghosts. You have an unlimited amount of this very weak film, which is basically your ammo for the camera, and you get higher tiers of film, but in more limited amounts later on in the game that do more damage to ghosts. However, you can buy these using the points that you get from taking pictures of ghosts, so it's a little system that wraps back in on itself, but I want to touch more on that later, because I do think it ties in with the game's difficulty, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I still want to talk more about the combat here right now. I should note that you do play this game from the perspective of 3 different characters, 2 girls and 1 guy. There's actually a 4th character you play as only in the prologue, but they don't matter that much. But 2 of them play pretty similarly, using the camera to combat ghosts, as most Fatal Frame games do. However, for the first time in the series, you actually have a different form of combat with the guy, Choshiro. His chapters, he actually has a flashlight. You don't have a first-person mode with Choshiro. You actually have a more third-person action-oriented section where you charge up the flashlight and it makes this big blue ring of light that'll damage all ghosts when you release the button. So it's almost like this flashlight shotgun thing. And it can damage way more ghosts, and it does way more damage than the camera ever does. So it's more of like an action section whenever you have a chapter where you play as Choshiro. It goes more away from survival horror to more of like a survival action type game. They throw ghosts at you in far more numbers that you can take out. You can hit like 3 or 4 ghosts at once with one blast of the flashlight. And while I'd say again, the big theme here is that this game isn't as scary as previous games in the series, I will say that it's a very welcome change of pace overall within this game. Whenever I got to one of those chapters, it was just fun to do something a little different, and it wasn't fully different. There was a couple of nitpicks I have with it, including the flashlight is charged off of lunar power, like moon power, right? And there's a little meter in the bottom right that tells you how much power you have left, and every shot that you charge up and shoot reduces the amount of power it has. And when it gets to the bottom, you straight up cannot use the flashlight anymore until it recharges. But I kind of didn't see the point of this system very much at all, because there's no other options in combat. Like it's not like the camera where you have like this super weak film that you have infinite amount of that you can still do a little damage with. You can't do any damage at all. You can't do anything if the flashlight's out of power. And I think they realize this because when you're in this third person mode, the flashlight doesn't seem to charge, like if at all. So I'm sitting there in third person confused, like, oh my god, why can't I shoot? And then I realize, oh, I'm out of power for the flashlight. I need to have the flashlight recharge. So you just put the flashlight away for a second and then put it back up, and it instantly gives you enough for one more shot. So it's weird. There's no really management of the resource. I don't really understand what that resource is there to begin with, because all it does is make me click the triangle button to basically reload the flashlight. I just go bing bing, and then the flashlight's reloaded for another shot. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really take any time to load up that other shot or do anything. I don't know. It's a really weird choice. But overall, I did enjoy the flashlight gameplay. I thought it was a fun change of pace. It made everything a little more fun, a little more action-y for a bit of a section, and provided some nice variety. And speaking of variety, there is a fairly wide variety of enemies and scenarios in the game. A lot of great little maps, great different enemy types, different areas to fight them in different configurations. I think that's one of the game's greatest strengths, and one of Fatal Frame's greatest strengths is that there's just a wide variety, especially visually, of enemies, because they're often tied in to the story itself and all that. So it's really neat seeing characters that you've learned about show up in the story and having to fight them, and having to fight multiple ghosts at once in different scenarios and different rooms, tighter rooms, wider rooms, a room with something in the middle that you can't strafe around. There's a lot of variety in this game. I had never found the combat truly boring. Easy, yes, but boring, no. I'm doing this in post a little bit, but I really wanted to briefly mention that there are puzzles in this game, like any good survival horror game has. There are plenty of puzzles that you have to solve throughout the game. However, I really wanted to mention, because this frustrated me to no end, that while most of the puzzles are pretty piss easy, they just give you the answers to them, you just plug it in. There's a little slide puzzle or something. They're pretty easy. They're fine puzzles. They're easy. There's one puzzle in the game where it gives you three sets of numbers. One of the sets is blank. And you're supposed to interpret by the way the numbers are set up that it's like a Sudoku puzzle, and that's how you fill in the blanks for the final set of numbers. But there's no there's no mention of Sudoku. They're not like there's nothing that would ever indicate that you're supposed to do Sudoku with these. You get a piece of text that hints towards like what numbers you're supposed to add in, and from that text you're supposed to extrapolate that you're supposed to do Sudoku to like solve it. But like I did not get that at all from it. This is the only thing in the game that I had to look up, and I was met with threads filled with frustration of other people experiencing the same thing, where they're like, how the fuck were you supposed to know that you were supposed to solve this with Sudoku? To someone who probably does Sudoku a lot, it's probably obvious, but like, I don't know how Sudoku works. How am I supposed to even know that without any reference? That just really frustrated me. I wanted to make sure I got that in the video. Puzzles are good outside of that one puzzle, which you'll probably have to look up the answer to. Let's just dive in right to the difficulty since I just mentioned it. The game is definitely the easiest in the Fatal Frame series to date. It's almost too easy for its own good at times. Like I said, there's a large variety of enemies in the game, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? There's a large variety of enemies in the game, and some of them even have unique mechanics. There's one boss that will put paint drops on your ceiling. It's like a painter ghost. He puts paint on your screen, so it's harder for you to see. There's some ghosts that like hang from the ceiling. There's even this one ghost that I really thought was neat, where it shot these ghostly fireballs that you had to deal with while they homed in on you. But the ghost is still doing his thing and trying to attack you normally. So it added like basically extra things you had to deal with in the fight. But the big problem is that the ghosts really aren't aggressive or fast enough to deal with you. And since you know where the ghosts are at all times, thanks to the little indicator on the top of the screen during combat, you're able to locate the ghosts extremely quickly, charge up a shot, and blast them before they're even able to really do anything. And a lot of these ghosts just don't even have enough health to take a few hits and attack you back. I barely remember any times in the game where I was actually damaged by a ghost significantly enough to be concerned. In fact, there's only one fight in the game where I found it to be fairly difficult. Every other fight in the game was pretty much an entire cakewalk. The ghosts rarely were able to even, like I'm saying, attack me. And these mechanics that a lot of these ghosts have, a lot of them have unique mechanics, but they don't really matter. I didn't even know the painter ghost boss could put paint on your screen until the post game when I fought him again, and I took a little too long on one time, and he did it. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't see him do that during the story mode because I just killed him in like 2 hits. It's kind of frustrating because I'm like, man, they really cooked. They had a lot of mechanics and unique things going on here, but it was just all hidden by the game being too easy, you know? Even the final boss, I killed in like 3 hits, and she didn't even attack me. I didn't even get to see her attack at all. It was kind of anticlimactic. So it's just the difficulty is a little frustrating. And you get all excited for like this boss fight and everything, and then you walk up to it, kill it in like 2 hits, and you're like, wow, that was way easier than the Joe Schmo ghost down the hall. And that brings up the fact that I think the ghosts feel very inconsistent to me in terms of difficulty as well. Like sometimes like a Joe Schmo ghost will just take like 6 hits to die, and you're like, oh my god, like this guy, he's not hard, but like it's like, god, this guy is a tank. But then you fight a boss and they die in like 1 to 2 hits, and you're like, oh my god, you're supposed to be the boss. Like how come? I don't understand. And this just gets exacerbated the further you get into the game. As you get a bunch of upgrades and special lenses, some of these with the full max power, which you're easily able to get before the final boss, and the upgraded special lenses, like you just start obliterating these ghosts before they're even able to do anything. It almost feels like the game is more difficult earlier on, and later on it just becomes an absolute cakewalk. I'm gonna say the only fight that I even had difficulty with was when they actually decided to throw 6 ghosts at me at once in one of the camera sections of the game. there rarely is any difficult. The actual true difficult fights of the game are when they throw multiple ghosts at you. But still, it's a little mitigated by the fact that you know where the ghosts are at all times. If there's a ghost in front of me and the game is telling me there's also a ghost behind me, I can make the decision to just put the camera down, walk to a different angle where I can get them both behind me or in front of me, and take a picture of them both. But if I didn't know that ghost was behind me and I knew there was another ghost in the room somewhere, I would have to make a lot more different choices. I might get attacked by the ghost. I might risk it and just attack the ghost in front of me. There need to be more fights where there are multiple ghosts fighting you at once. I think that's maybe if they want to keep this sort of gameplay they have going on here with like telling you where the ghosts are, we need to be fighting more multiple ghosts, because often they'll lock you in a room with a boss ghost and it's just the one ghost and it's just like, okay, I'm gonna destroy this ghost because there's nothing else to worry about in this room besides him. So the best fights in the game were the bosses and characters and enemies that just threw multiple ghosts at you at once. And a lot of this is exacerbated by the fact that resources are not limited very much at all. They feel like they're gonna be, but they're not. So for your camera, like I said, you have an infinite supply of the most basic film shots for your camera, which do a very minimal amount of damage. And while you're exploring, you will find more damaging variants of film to use. The problem is that you can also buy this film from save points at a very, very cheap price in very large quantities. So you're never really hurting for ammo, essentially. The only ammo that was limited during the main story was the two most strongest types of film in the entire game. Those two types of films were very limited and very powerful, but honestly, the mid-tier films are unlimited and pretty powerful, especially when combined with some of the lenses. The green mid-tier film, which I used through most of the game, combined with the blast lens on the camera, which does more damage when you use it, just three shots most of the ghosts in the entire game, pretty much. I didn't really find a use for using anything else. I just sort of loaded up on the green film and just went to town on all the ghosts. And you would think, okay, well, maybe the resource management comes in with healing and with damage you're taking, but that's really not the case either. You will find around the environment healing items. There's this basic healing item that heals 1/3 of your health, a healing item that fully heals you, and then there's also a mirror stone, which is basically a revive. It'll revive you back to full health if you die and prevent you from getting a game over, which you only can carry one of those. But the problem is that you can also just buy the basic 1/3 healing medicines from save points for cheap prices as well. By the end of the game, I only really used maybe 6 or 7 of them throughout my entire playthrough, I want to say. And honestly, half of those were just from that one fight where I had to fight 6 ghosts at once. I ended the game with 28 of the things in my inventory, just from the ones I'd found, and then also after that fight with the 6 ghosts, I just made sure to stay stocked. But they never really threw a challenge like that at me ever again, so I ended up finishing the game with tons and tons of healing items. The full heals I really only used in that specific fight, and the revive I never had to use at all, which is really sad because you only can carry one of them at once, and the game tries to give you more when you're exploring the environment, but you only can carry one. So the game just constantly goes, yeah, you can't carry that, sorry. And then there's just an item in the room that you can't pick up, and it's very unsatisfying to not clear the room of items. So that's a little frustrating. That there's really not a lot of tension in the game. I wouldn't say that. There is a lot of tension and spookiness. The game is spooky. The game is spooky. And it does a good job at building that tension, but it doesn't do a good job at following through on that tension, because there's a lot of systems and safety nets in place, like showing you the ghosts in cutscenes, like giving you plenty of ammo and health, no matter what, allowing you to buy that for yourself, that just undermine that tension a lot, where a lot of the fights don't feel scary, more than they feel like, oh my god, get out of here. Like, you know, like it feels just a little more of an inconvenience than scary, unless they just really go full committal and just rush at the screen or make a loud noise. It's only like these minor like jumps and musical stings that really are actually scary in the game, while everything else is more of a just like, oh yeah, that's pretty spooky. That's a nice little spooky atmosphere you got going on here. It's a nice little haunted house jaunt. I think though, however, because of this lack of difficulty, that this is a fantastic starting point for someone that's looking to get into the series or a newcomer to the horror genre in general. I think this is a very great place to start if you're new to the horror genre and are sort of intimidated by the Resident Evils of the world, where you have to micromanage your inventory slots, open the map constantly to try and memorize where you have to go and enact a plan. I think this is a much easier game to get into and get through if you're just an average Joe Schmo who hasn't played many horror games before and is looking to dip your feet into the genre. When it comes to the story, this is where the game really shines. I'm not going to be spoiling any details about the story fully, but I'll give you the basic premise and setup here. The story will follow 3 girls who are survivors of a mysterious Japanese ritual that went totally wrong. It's totally botched, and it caused an entire island of people to develop a psychological disorder that's called a moonlight syndrome, which is the root cause of the ghost presence at the infirmary and living home for the patients that contracted this illness. So basically, there's this island, and they have this ritual every year. They performed it one year, it went all wrong. Everyone on the island developed this horrible moonlight syndrome, which basically killed them all and turned them into ghosts, except for these 3 girls who are coming back years later. We also have the other chapter of the story, which follows a private detective, our friend Choshiro, with the flashlight gameplay, who rescued the aforementioned girls from the ceremony years ago. He's returning to this location to chase down the man responsible for the ritual and everything that went wrong here, and that's what his story is mainly focused around. And I gotta say, I really enjoy the setting. It's like a mental hospital and like sanatorium for these people with this horrible psychological disease, and these, like, a lot of the ghosts will be like doctors that were trying to fix and help in aiding this disease, but they were like doing it in this weird experimental horrible way. They're giving little girls lobotomies to try and like open their brains to try and like figure out the root cause of this spiritual issue. It's just a fucked up hospital, a fucked up J-horror hospital setting is just very unique. I feel like I haven't seen that in a video game before, so I think they did a really good job here, and it's a very interesting setting, especially for the Fatal Frame series, which usually sticks to more traditional like Japanese house aesthetics. I think this is a nice change up in its own series for the setting. And the story, it's just super strong. The game, it offers a unique and frankly dread-filled tale of suicide, obsession, messed up faces, and lobotomies on little girls. It's the subject matter here is not afraid to get dark and complex and really serious. And it really just begs for you to unravel the mystery of what happened here, the details of the ritual, what went wrong, what Moonlight Syndrome really is and what causes it, what's going on with this. Everyone has these messed up faces that are just like garbled in mirrors and stuff. It's really dreadfully captivating, and I was enthralled and engaged with the story from start to finish. I would argue, honestly, out of the Fatal Frame games that I played 1, 2, and this one, I think that this is the strongest story in the franchise to date. I really enjoyed Fatal Frame 2's story a lot as well, but I think this one was just told in such a great way, and I think it was really captivating, and the mystery was super, super intriguing and fairly easy to digest. However, I will say that my biggest complaint about the story is that a lot of it, I mean a lot of it, is shared through text. Like, man, the game stops every 5 minutes for you to pick up a notebook, a textbook, a scrawling that just will have pages and pages and pages of text to read through from the perspective of a bunch of different other characters. And these are very actually engaging pieces of text. They're very well written. They really, really communicate the story very well. They're really engaging. I enjoyed reading and learning about the lore and characters of the game through all this text. But there's just so much of it. Like, it's almost ridiculous. I feel like I played the game for about 10 hours, and I feel like half my game time was reading these texts. I don't think it was that much, but it felt like it. Sometimes it just felt like I was just getting back to back to back to back readings. I was getting a little exhausted reading all this text. It's very good text. It's very rich and well written, but it can be exhausting at times. I can't help but feel like we already use the ghosts as a medium to tell certain details of the plot and story. Ghosts will walk into certain rooms, will appear in front of certain objects, will mention certain things, will deliver lines of dialogue that tells you more about that ghost as a character and what their role is in the story. And I can't help but feel we could have leaned into that more. Have some ghosts like appear and like reenact a scene that happened instead of having me read about it. So I can walk around the room and pick up items and stuff while the ghosts are basically being an audio tape for me to listen to and get the lore of. I think that would have been a more elegant solution. I think this was a problem with budget at the time that this game released, especially. The Fatal Frame series has always been niche and made on a bit of a shoestring budget. But still, I can't help but feel this way, that I think there's a little too much reading as well written as it was. I think we could have gone a different route here. But like I said, overall, story was absolutely incredible. I really enjoyed it from start to finish. I'm going to be thinking about this story for quite a long while. I highly recommend to play through it just for the story alone, honestly. I recommend you check it out. Okay, but how fun was the game? It was too easy, word heavy, but how fun was the game? And I have to say, like I'm saying, the game was an absolute blast. I was really enthralled from top to bottom with this game, and I think it really shows the Fatal Frame formula still works. 4 entries in, and it's a recipe for a fantastic game. Even after finishing the game, I was checking out the mission mode that I unlocked, contemplating a new game plus run, checking out the costumes that I unlocked. I think there's a lot to do here, and it's a very, very fun game to play. And I think the length of the game really complements what it wants you to do with it. I do think there's a lot of replay value here. The game is pretty short in length, especially if you skip a lot of the cutscenes. You're probably looking at about a 5-hour runtime casually, if you like 5 to 6 hour runtime if you skip all the cutscenes and know what you're doing. But you do unlock a lot of costumes, a lot of accessories for all the characters. You still don't have all the upgrades for your camera by the time you finish the story for all the characters, so you can work on doing that. There are these collectible dolls that you can find throughout the whole map. There's about 70 or so of them to find, and you get a reward for collecting them all as well. There are collectible ghost pictures denoted by this blue light that'll show up sometimes, so you can get those as a collectible, as well as logging every single ghost and enemy in the game. That will also be a little collectible checklist for you to check off, and all of this will feed back into the unlockable costumes and reward system. You can unlock new lenses for the camera that have new effects in combat, a bunch of costumes. You even have a mission mode alongside the main story mode that you unlock after you beat the story once, where the game will put you in little combat scenarios that are sort of set up with a time limit or a different objective in mind, and they just have these here as little challenges for you where you can earn more points and upgrade points for your weapons and to buy stuff in the shop. There's a lot to do here. You can S-rank these missions. The New Game Plus mode is a big bonus here, just so you can see all the stuff you're unlocking. It's fantastic. I think that this game is basically begging for you to replay it. And while I don't think it's a game that'll last you 10 replays, I think you could get a solid 2 to 3 replays out of this game for sure. Just for fun. That'll probably be where the fun lasts you. Play this game 2 or 3 times through. Go ahead and get through the mission mode, and you'll probably be pretty satisfied with that. I can see completionists having a great time with Fatal Frame. However, I do think, let's talk about the price here. I think the price of the game is a little out of whack. The Fatal Frame series has always been made on a tight budget, and this isn't a full price game. This isn't a $60, $70 title. This is a $50 title on Steam anyway. But that price kind of rubs me a little wrong, especially because when you look up Fatal Frame on Steam, we have two Fatal Frame games on there. Fatal Frame 4, which is this one, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. And we also have Fatal Frame 5, Maiden of Blackwater on Steam. Fatal Frame 5 sits at a cool $40. That's its base price. Fatal Frame 4, though, sits at $50. I don't understand why they've done this. My theory why they've done this and priced this game higher than Fatal Frame 5 is because this game was never released outside of Japan. They know, and it's not as well known as the other games in the series, and they know only people who are really going to know about this game, even coming out, are like their niche dedicated audience. I think their aim was really just to market toward their niche dedicated Fatal Frame audience and sort of just squeeze them for a few extra dollars, because they know they're going to buy it, and they'll make their money back if they charged this amount of money and sold a certain amount of copies to their dedicated fan base. I think that's why they did it, because I know Maiden of Blackwater has sold many more copies than this game did, especially on launch. This game seems to have only sold a little, like, over 100,000 copies, 150,000 copies, maybe. It's not a very high-selling game in the franchise, but I still think $50 is a little too much for the price. Like I said, a playthrough is pretty much going to take you maybe 10 to 12 hours at most, at absolute most. And if you're the type of person that only wants to play through this game once, I think $50 is a really big asking price for that. If you're someone who's going to replay this over and over again and really 100% it, I think it's pretty fair. You could easily get 30 plus hours out of the game, I think. But I think at 50, it's a little too much. I got this game on sale for a little under $30, and I think that was way worth it for that price. If you can get this game like under $40 or under, I think you should go for it. But at $50, I have a hard time recommending that you rush out and buy this game like immediately. I think you should definitely wishlist it, wait for a sale, and buy it then. I encourage financially supporting this game because this is a case where it's a more niche franchise, and the developers are on a bit of a budget for this, and the series only really continues when people buy it. Maybe go try the game out for yourself and then purchase the game if you like what you played. I would definitely recommend financially supporting the game, but I do have to say, wait for a sale for sure. I just can't justify the asking price of $50. Yeah, but overall, I would really recommend this game to any fans of the horror genre looking for something both mechanically and aesthetically different from what else is on offer in the scene. There's really not a lot of franchises like Fatal Frame. Like I'm saying, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, all these games, they're more Western focused with their horror settings, and that's fine and dandy and all. But we're really missing out in the J-horror niche, and I think Fatal Frame is one of the last bastions for that. I don't think we get any of those. We get any of those types of games here, and very much. And I think we should get some more of it. It's very fun and interesting, and they have very unique takes on horror, and we should support it. I think it's very, very good. Fatal Frame 4 is not without its flaws. They do stick out like a sore thumb, but it's just such a lovingly crafted and engaging game, especially with its narrative, that I'm willing to overlook a lot of these flaws to just enjoy it for what it is. Like, listen, you're not getting a perfect game here. It's not going to blow your socks off to the moon. It's not going to change your life. But I think this game has a lot of soul, a lot of effort poured into it very clearly. I think it's criminally underplayed game in both its series and its genre. If you have a free weekend and you're in the mood for some light spookiness, I think you'd enjoy it too. It's far from a perfect game, but it's got plenty of spirit, and I fully recommend Fatal Frame 4: Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. Fantastic game. I think you should check it out and just see how you like it. But yeah, that's gonna be it from me. I'll see you later next time